My hands were shaking as I sat in that sterile conference room, watching my parents smooth their expensive clothes and check their watches like they had somewhere more important to be. 25 years. That's how long it had been since they dropped me off at Grandma Cordelia's weathered front porch with a single suitcase and a promise they'd be back real soon, sweetheart. I was 5 then, clutching a stuffed rabbit named Mr. Buttons, watching their red sedan disappear around the corner while Grandma's warm hand settled on my shoulder. Now here they were, Vivienne and Preston Ashworth, looking every bit the successful couple they'd apparently become. Her in designer pearls, him in a suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. They'd shown up to Grandma's funeral 3 days ago, like ghosts materializing from thin air, weeping dramatically at the graveside as if they'd been devoted children all along. The mourners who didn't know better probably thought they were grieving. But I saw the way their eyes had lit up when the lawyer mentioned the reading of the will. $45 million, my mother had whispered to my father as we'd filed out of the cemetery. Can you believe the old woman was sitting on that much? The lawyer, Mr. Brennan, shuffled through his papers with deliberate slowness, his weathered face giving nothing away. I'd known him since childhood. He'd been Grandma's friend for decades, handling her affairs with the quiet competence she'd valued. My stomach churned as I watched my parents lean forward eagerly, already counting money they believed was theirs. "We're her only blood relatives," my mother announced suddenly, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "Obviously, everything should come to us." I felt Mr. Brennan's eyes find mine across the polished conference table, and something in his expression steadied my racing heart. He'd been there the night my parents left, helping Grandma make hot chocolate while I cried myself to sleep. He'd watched me grow up, celebrated my high school graduation when my parents couldn't be bothered to return a phone call, walked me down the aisle at my small wedding when I had no father to do it. "Before we proceed," Mr. Brennan said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent 50 years practicing law, "I need to clarify something about Mrs. Cordelia Blackwood's will. She was very specific about her intentions, and she anticipated this exact scenario." My mother's perfectly manicured fingers drummed against the table. "What scenario? We're here to collect our inheritance. There's no scenario to anticipate." "Mrs. Blackwood," Mr. Brennan continued, opening a thick folder, "came to me 7 years ago with concerns about her estate. She'd heard through mutual acquaintances that her son and daughter-in-law were living quite comfortably in California, running a successful consulting business. She was curious why, if they were doing so well, they'd never once reached out to check on their daughter or offer any support." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. My father shifted uncomfortably, his confident facade cracking just slightly. "Now see here, we had our reasons." "I'm sure you did," Mr. Brennan interrupted smoothly. "Mrs. Blackwood was particularly interested in those reasons, so she hired a private investigator." He pulled out a manila envelope, thick with photographs and documents. "She discovered that you, Preston, inherited nearly $200,000 from your own mother in 2010. You, Vivienne, received a settlement of $300,000 from a car accident in 2014. Between your business and these windfalls, you've maintained a household income well above the national average." My hands clenched in my lap. All those years I'd wondered if they were struggling, if that's why they couldn't come back for me. All those nights I'd lain awake thinking maybe they were just too poor to take care of a child. The silence stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. My mother's face had gone pale beneath her carefully applied makeup, and I could see a vein pulsing at my father's temple. They'd been caught, exposed, and the weight of their choices was finally crushing down on them. "That's irrelevant," my mother said, but her voice had lost its commanding edge. "Money doesn't change the fact that we're family. We're her blood." Mr. Brennan's weathered hands moved to another document, and I noticed how gently he handled it, as if it contained something precious. Mrs. Blackwood anticipated that argument as well. She spent considerable time crafting what she called her love clause. He looked directly at me, his eyes kind but serious. She wrote, and I quote, "Blood may determine genetics, but love determines family. My granddaughter Maya has been my daughter in every way that matters for 20 years. She has held my hand through illness, celebrated my joys, and given me a reason to wake up every morning. Meanwhile, my biological son and his wife have chosen to remain strangers to both of us." Maya. He'd said my name, and hearing it in Grandma's words made my chest tight with emotion. I could almost hear her voice, see her sitting at her old oak kitchen table, with her reading glasses perched on her nose, carefully choosing each word. "The clause continues," Mr. Brennan said, his voice growing stronger. "Therefore, I leave my entire estate, including all properties, investments, and liquid assets totaling approximately $45 million, to Maya Charlotte Blackwood, the granddaughter who chose to stay when others chose to leave. Furthermore, should Preston and Vivian Ashworth attempt to contest this will, they will be required to repay every cent I spent raising their daughter, including housing, food, clothing, medical care, and education expenses, calculated with interest at 7% annually. This amount totals approximately $437,000. My father's chair scraped against the floor as he stood abruptly. "This is ridiculous! You can't punish us for what?" The words erupted from me before I could stop them. 25 years of buried pain and confusion finally finding their voice. "For abandoning your 5-year-old daughter? For never calling, never writing, never even sending a birthday card?" My hands were trembling, but not from fear anymore. From rage. Pure, justified rage. My mother's composure finally cracked completely. "You don't understand what it was like," she shrieked, her designer mask slipping to reveal something desperate and ugly underneath. "We were young. We were struggling. We thought—" "You thought what?" I stood up, my voice steady now, fueled by decades of suppressed hurt. "That I'd just disappear? That I'd stop existing because you found it inconvenient to be parents?" The conference room felt too small, the air too thick. "I used to stand at Grandma's front window every single day for 2 years, watching for your red car. Every birthday, every Christmas, every first day of school. I thought maybe today would be the day you'd remember you had a daughter." Mr. Brennan remained seated, but I could see the protective tension in his shoulders. He'd been my anchor through all of this, the one adult who'd never let me down. When I'd graduated nursing school, he'd been in the front row clapping. When my marriage fell apart after 3 years, he'd been the one who helped me find a good divorce attorney. He was more family to me than these strangers had ever been. "Maya, sweetheart," my father tried, his voice taking on a wheedling tone that made my skin crawl. "We made mistakes, yes, but we're here now. We want to make things right." "Now?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You want to make things right now? After Grandma's dead? And there's money involved?" I could feel something shifting inside me, like a door I'd kept locked for 25 years finally swinging open. "Do you know what she did when I had pneumonia at age 8? She slept in a chair next to my bed for 6 nights straight, monitoring my breathing. Do you know who taught me to drive? Who helped me with college applications? Who held me when I cried about boys, about friends, about wondering why my own parents didn't love me enough to stay?" Vivian's face had gone red and blotchy. "We sent money. We sent checks." "Twice," Mr. Brennan said quietly, consulting his notes. "You sent 2 checks totaling $600 over 20 years. Mrs. Blackwood deposited them into Maya's college fund." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. $600. In 20 years. I'd seen people spend more than that on a single dinner. "This is extortion," my father snarled, his sophisticated facade completely gone now. We'll fight this. We'll take it to court. Go ahead, I said, my voice cutting through his bluster like ice. Take it to court. Spend your money on lawyers, drag this through the legal system for years. But understand something. Every day you fight, this will be another day the whole world gets to see exactly what kind of people you are. Mr. Brennan cleared his throat gently. I should mention that Mrs. Blackwood also included a provision for media transparency. Should this will be contested, all documentation becomes part of the public record, including the private investigator's findings about your financial situation and the detailed accounting of Maya's care expenses. I watched the blood drain from both their faces as the implications sank in. Their successful consulting business, their reputation in whatever social circles they moved in, all of it would be destroyed when people learned they'd abandoned their child while living comfortably. You're bluffing, my mother whispered, but I could hear the doubt creeping into her voice. Mrs. Blackwood was many things, Mr. Brennan said with a slight smile, but she was never one to bluff. She was a chess player, you see, always thinking several moves ahead. He turned to another page in his file. She also instructed me to inform you that she kept detailed records of every milestone she witnessed alone. Maya's first steps, her first words, her first day of school, her graduation. She documented everything, hoping one day you'd want to know what you'd missed. That documentation is also part of the legal record now. Something broke inside me then, not in a painful way, but like a dam finally giving way to let the water flow free. She kept pictures, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Hundreds of them. Every birthday, every holiday, every small moment she thought was worth remembering. She used to say she was keeping them for when you came back, so you could see how I'd grown. I looked directly at my mother. She never stopped hoping you'd want to know your daughter. Vivian's eyes filled with tears, but I felt nothing for her pain. It was 20 years too late. That's the cruelest part, I continued, standing straighter, feeling something powerful settling into my bones. She never stopped loving you. Even after everything, she still called you her son. She still hoped. But she loved me more, and she knew I deserved better than parents who could walk away and never look back. My father's hands were shaking now. His earlier confidence completely evaporated. Maya, please. We can work something out. We don't need all of it. Maybe just enough to... To what? I cut him off, feeling a surge of power I'd never experienced before. To pay off your debts? To upgrade your lifestyle? To finally feel like coming back was worth the effort? I walked around the conference table, and for the first time in my life, I saw my parents shrink back from me. You want to know what's really tragic? If you'd come back any time in the last 20 years, not for money, not because you needed something, but just because you missed your daughter, Grandma would have welcomed you with open arms. She would have forgiven everything. But we can't turn back time, Mr. Brennan said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of years. And Mrs. Blackwood was very clear about her intentions. Maya, the inheritance is yours, free and clear. No strings attached, no conditions to meet. I turned to face my parents fully, seeing them clearly for perhaps the first time. They looked smaller somehow, diminished by their own choices. Here's what's going to happen, I said, my voice steady and calm. You're going to leave this office, drive back to whatever life you've built in California, and you're never going to contact me again. You had 25 years to be my parents. That opportunity is over. Maya, you can't mean that, my mother pleaded, reaching toward me with her manicured hands. We're family. We made mistakes, but no. The word came out sharp and final. Family doesn't abandon a 5-year-old child. Family doesn't stay away for decades and then show up with their hands out. Family is what Grandma and I built together, what Mr. Brennan and I have maintained all these years. You're strangers who happen to share my DNA. The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the air conditioning humming, the distant sound of traffic through the windows, the ragged breathing of two people who'd finally realized they'd lost a gamble they'd made 25 years ago. Preston stood slowly, his movements those of a much older man. If that's really how you feel. They left without another word, and I stood there listening to their footsteps fade down the hallway, feeling something I'd never experienced before. Not just relief or vindication, but a bone-deep sense of completion. The little girl who'd waited at the window was finally free. Mr. Brennan and I sat in silence for several minutes after they'd gone. Finally, he spoke. "Your grandmother would be proud of you, Maya." That took tremendous courage. "I don't feel courageous," I admitted, sinking back into my chair. "I feel empty. But good empty, if that makes sense. Like I've been carrying around a weight I didn't even realize was there. It makes perfect sense." He smiled, the kind of warm, paternal smile I'd grown up with. "Now, let's talk about your future. $45 million is a significant responsibility. Have you given any thought to what you'd like to do?" The question hit me like a splash of cold water. For 25 years, I'd been Maya, the abandoned daughter, Maya, the girl who wasn't wanted, Maya, the nurse who worked double shifts to make ends meet. I'd never been Maya, the wealthy woman, Maya with choices, Maya with power. "I want to keep working," I said slowly, the words feeling strange on my tongue. "I love nursing. I love helping people. But—" I paused, an idea forming. "Grandma always talked about how there weren't enough resources for elderly care in this town. She used to say that people shouldn't have to choose between medical care and keeping their dignity." Mr. Brennan's eyes lit up. "She mentioned that to me many times. She had some ideas about what could be done with the right funding. A care facility," I said, the vision becoming clearer. Not just a nursing home, but a place where people could live with respect and comfort, where families could afford to visit, where the staff is paid well enough to truly care. I felt a flutter of excitement in my chest. "She'd love that, wouldn't she?" "She would love it," he confirmed. "And there's something else you should know. 3 months before she passed, she asked me to research the legal requirements for establishing a charitable foundation. She never got the chance to move forward with it, but she had it all planned out," Mr. Brennan continued, pulling out another folder I hadn't seen before. "The Cordelia Blackwood Foundation for Dignified Aging. She even had architectural sketches drawn up by Henderson's firm downtown." He spread the papers across the table, and I felt my breath catch. There were detailed drawings of a beautiful facility with private rooms, common areas filled with natural light, gardens for walking, even a small library. "She knew," I whispered, touching the sketches with trembling fingers. "She knew I'd want to do this. She knew you, Maya. Better than anyone." His voice was gentle. "She also knew that inheriting this much money would change how people treat you, and she wanted you to be prepared for that." As if summoned by his words, my phone buzzed with a text message, then another, and another. Word was already spreading through our small town's efficient gossip network. I glanced at the screen and felt my stomach drop. "Jessica from the hospital," I said, reading the messages aloud. "She says congratulations and asks if I'm still coming to work tomorrow. Then she asks if I'd like to invest in her husband's new restaurant." I looked up at Mr. Brennan. I've known Jessica for 8 years. She's never mentioned her husband wanting to open a restaurant. My phone buzzed again. This time it was my landlord, asking if I'd like to discuss purchasing the duplex I'd been renting for the past 5 years. Then my neighbor, wondering if I'd be interested in funding her daughter's college education. Then someone from high school I hadn't spoken to in a decade, reaching out to reconnect. "It's starting already," I said, feeling overwhelmed. "People I haven't heard from in years suddenly want to be my best friend." "Your grandmother experienced something similar when people learned about her wealth," Mr. Brennan said. "She was wise about it, though. She learned to distinguish between those who cared about her and those who cared about her money. I thought about the funeral 3 days ago, remembering faces I'd known my whole life. Mrs. Patterson from the grocery store, who'd always slipped me an extra cookie when Grandma wasn't looking. Dr. Chen, who'd made house calls when Grandma was too sick to come to his office. The Martinez family, whose daughter I'd tutored through nursing school. They'd all been there, genuinely grieving, genuinely supporting me. None of them had mentioned money. The real people will stay real, I said, understanding dawning. And the fake ones will show themselves. Exactly. Mr. Brennan smiled. Now, about the foundation. I can have the paperwork started immediately if you'd like. There are tax advantages to establishing it quickly, and frankly, I think having a clear philanthropic purpose will help filter out some of the opportunists. 6 months later, I stood in the construction site that would become the Cordelia Blackwood Center for Dignified Aging, wearing a hard hat and steel-toed boots that cost more than my old monthly rent. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd gone from stretching every dollar to overseeing a $15 million construction project, yet I'd never felt more like myself. "Miss Blackwood, the contractors need your approval on the garden design," called Maria Santos, the project manager I'd hired after extensive interviews. She was a woman in her 50s who'd built her reputation creating spaces that felt like homes rather than institutions. When I'd asked her why she wanted this job, she'd said, "Because my mother died in a place that treated her like a number, and I want to build something different." I followed her to where the landscape architects had laid out their plans. Instead of the typical sterile courtyards I'd seen at other facilities, they'd designed winding paths through flower beds, raised garden boxes for residents who wanted to tend plants, and quiet alcoves with benches facing different directions to catch morning or evening sun. "It's perfect," I said, meaning it. Grandma would have loved this. The changes in my life had been dramatic and sometimes difficult. True to Mr. Brennan's prediction, I'd discovered who my real friends were. Jessica from the hospital had grown cold when I politely declined to invest in her husband's restaurant. My landlord had become almost aggressive when I'd chosen to buy a modest house instead of his overpriced duplex. But Mrs. Patterson still saved me cookies. Dr. Chen still asked about my health with genuine concern. And the Martinez family had sent their daughter to help me sort through Grandma's belongings without expecting anything in return. The most surprising change had been at work. I decided to continue nursing part-time, but my colleagues' behavior toward me had shifted dramatically. Some treated me with a deference that made me uncomfortable, others with a barely concealed resentment. I'd overheard whispers about how I didn't need the job anymore, and questions about why I was taking up space that someone else needed. You know what the hardest part is? I'd told Mr. Brennan during one of our regular check-ins. I'm the same person I was 6 months ago, but nobody sees me that way anymore. Money changes everything around you, he'd replied. The trick is not letting it change what's inside you. Now, standing in the construction site, I felt like I'd finally found my balance. My phone buzzed, a text from my parents. After 6 months of silence, they'd started reaching out again, their messages carefully crafted to sound concerned rather than greedy. "Just wanted to see how you're doing, sweetie. Thinking of you on what would have been Mom's birthday. We've been doing some soul searching." I deleted the message without reading it fully. That chapter of my life was closed. 1 year after that life-changing day in Mr. Brennan's office, I stood at the entrance of the Cordelia Blackwood Center as our first residents moved in. Mrs. Eleanor Vasquez, 93 years old with sparkling eyes and a sharp wit, was wheeling herself through the front doors while her granddaughter carried a suitcase and a potted orchid. "This place feels like a home," Mrs. Vasquez announced, looking around at the warm wood floors, the natural light streaming through oversized windows, and the comfortable seating areas where people could gather or find solitude. Not like those other places that smell like disinfectant and sadness. I watched her granddaughter's eyes fill with tears of relief. We've been looking for the right place for 2 years, she told me. Everywhere else felt like we were just warehousing Grandma until... She couldn't finish the sentence, but I understood. She's not being warehoused here, I assured her. She's living here. There's a difference. The center had a waiting list of over 200 people, despite our ability to house only 60 residents. We'd hired staff at wages 30% above industry standard, implemented a 1-to-4 caregiver ratio, and created programs that treated our residents as whole people with interests, opinions, and ongoing lives worth living. Mr. Brennan appeared at my elbow carrying 2 cups of coffee. Your grandmother would be beside herself with joy, he said, watching as more families arrived for our opening day celebration. I feel her here, I admitted. Sometimes I catch myself looking around, expecting to see her in one of the common rooms, probably organizing a card game or lecturing someone about proper rose care. My phone buzzed with another message from my parents. This time, the subject line read, "Urgent Family Matter." I showed the screen to Mr. Brennan, who shook his head. A year of ignored messages. And now it's urgent, he observed dryly. They never give up, do they? I deleted it without opening it. Last month, it was about my father's health scare that required expensive treatment. The month before, my mother claimed they were losing their house. I sipped my coffee, feeling nothing but mild annoyance. They think if they just find the right sob story, I'll come running with my checkbook. And if they showed up here today? I considered the question seriously. I'd have security escort them off the property, not out of anger anymore, but because this place is about honoring people who stayed, who cared, who showed up when it mattered. They have no place here. As if summoned by my words, a familiar car pulled into the parking lot. My heart rate spiked for a moment before I realized it was Dr. Chen arriving with his own elderly mother who'd be joining our community. True family. Chosen family. The people who'd earned their place in my life through consistency and love. The transformation was complete. I was no longer Maya, the abandoned daughter, Maya, the struggling nurse, or even Maya, the unexpected heiress. I was Maya, the foundation builder, Maya, the legacy keeper, Maya who turned pain into purpose and inheritance into impact. Now tell me, what would you do if you were in my place? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from.